True greatness might be the exact opposite of what most people think. In a world obsessed with influence and status, an ancient teaching about becoming like children completely challenges our modern assumptions.
That's such a fascinating paradox. What made Jesus choose such a countercultural example to illustrate greatness?
Well, you have to understand the historical context. In first century Palestine, children had absolutely zero social status. They were essentially seen as non persons until they could contribute economically.
Oh, wow. So that makes his choice even more radical than it appears at first glance.
Exactly. And here's what's really interesting. This teaching came right after the disciples were literally arguing about who would get the highest positions in what they thought would be Jesus' earthly kingdom,
Hmm. So they were jockeying for power positions while completely missing the point about what true greatness means.
right? And instead of just scolding them, Jesus uses this incredible teaching moment. He brings in a child, someone who would have been shooed away in that culture, and says, unless you change and become like these little ones, you'll never enter the kingdom of heaven.
That must have been shocking to hear. It's like telling modern CEOs they need to become like interns to succeed.
And then he goes even further with these intense warnings about causing others to stumble. He talks about it being better to have a millstone, which weighed about 1,000 pounds, hung around your neck and being thrown into the sea.
The vivid imagery really drives home the seriousness of the message.
You know what's fascinating? He then lays out this practical framework for handling conflict in communities, starting with private conversations and only escalating if necessary. It's like an ancient conflict resolution manual that's still incredibly relevant.
Well, that's interesting. So he moves from these big philosophical principles right down to practical application.
Exactly. And then comes this amazing teaching about forgiveness. Peter thinks he's being super generous, suggesting forgiving someone 7 times, when Jewish tradition only required 3 times.
So, what was Jesus' response to that?
He says 77 times, or some translations say 70 times 7. The exact number isn't really the point, though. He's saying stop keeping count altogether. And then he tells this powerful parable about forgiveness.
Oh, right. The one about the servant with the massive debt?
Yeah, and we're talking about an astronomical sum here. In modern terms, it would be like billions of dollars. This servant gets forgiven this huge debt, but then refuses to forgive someone who owes him what would amount to a few $1,000s.
That really puts our own grudges in perspective, doesn't it?
Absolutely. And here's what ties it all together this childlike humility. He started with naturally leads to this kind of radical forgiveness. When we truly grasp how much we've been forgiven, it transforms how we treat others,
That's such a different approach from our modern self help culture that's all about asserting yourself and demanding your rights.
right? And what's really challenging is that Jesus isn't presenting this as optional. He's saying, this is what characterizes his kingdom. If we want to be part of it, we have to embrace this completely different value system.
That must have been hard for the disciples to accept, given their cultural expectations.
Well, think about it. They were expecting a conquering Messiah who would overthrow Rome. Instead, they got someone who said, true greatness looks like serving others and forgiving endlessly.
And 2,000 years later, it's still just as challenging to our natural inclinations.
You know what's really profound? This teaching wasn't just about individual spiritual growth, it was laying the foundation for how Christian communities would function. It's about creating spaces where people are invested in each other's spiritual well being.
That's so different from how many people approach church today, like spiritual consumers shopping for the perfect fit.
Exactly. And here's the thing when we embrace these principles, it changes everything about how we handle conflict, how we forgive, how we care for those who are struggling. It's a complete paradigm shift.
Well, that's really what makes this teaching timeless. It addresses fundamental human nature that hasn't changed in 2 millennia.
And that's why it's still exactly what we need today humility, careful handling of conflict, generous forgiveness, and complete dependence on God. These are the building blocks of healthy communities, whether in the first century or the 21st.